Hello, everybody. For those of you out there in internet land who might not know me, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I'm the host of this YouTube channel, Reformed GGA. And today I am going to be making a part of a series of videos for some young people who would like to go shooting with me in the not too distant future. And so this is going to be a series of videos basically on how to safely shoot and use semi-auto guns. This is not to say that non-semi-auto guns are not viable or not real guns or something like that. It's just that semi-auto guns are typically the ones that I use the most often, and when I go out shooting with people, they're the ones that most often show up. Like I said, it's not meant to denigrate the other firearm types. Revolvers have long served people for a good long time. Pump-action shotguns are incredibly versatile, one of the very few weapons that you can use to hunt something as small as a songbird and as large as a grizzly, depending on what it's loaded with, the range that you're using it at, so on and so forth. Lever guns can be incredibly enjoyable. I'm not trying to denigrate any of those. It's just that when I go shooting, it's usually with semi-autos, and when I take other people shooting, it's usually with semi-autos. Now, this particular group of young people that this series is primarily meant to address has gone shooting with me in the past. However, it's been a pretty long time, and because it's been such a long time, I want to review some things with them again before we actually get out there, just so that we're all on the same page and we have the same idea about how the firearms work and what would be safe and what isn't and all that. And before we get into the 4 universal safety rules, I believe that it would be good for us to take a step back and just consider firearms from a little bit more general perspective in terms of what it basically is. And for those of you who may be curious, all of the guns that I'm going to handle in these videos have already been checked and cleared off screen, as I hope any reasonable person would do. But a firearm, despite how the media might present it, or despite how we might have been raised to look at them, or particular cultures that we've been in, how those cultures might have opinions of them. Despite all of that, at its core, a firearm is a machine. And it's a very powerful machine a lot of times. And powerful machines are such that they can be used well or they can be misused. What makes the difference is the person who is using it and what they actually intend to do with it and the care that they take in how they handle it. There's lots of machines that are very powerful that are out there. One of the more common ones that most people are familiar with, especially here in the States, but even other people in other nations are still very familiar with them, would be vehicles. Vehicles of various flavors, whether they be motorbikes, whether we be talking about sedans, pickups, SUVs, semis. Excuse me, sorry. Have some issues, and so sometimes I wind up doing weird things at weird times. Please ignore that. But like I said, vehicles in general are very powerful machines, and whenever you get on one or get into one, you're riding in something that is usually hundreds of pounds up to several thousand pounds. And if misused, it could do a whole lot of damage. And there are people who have used vehicles to do a whole lot of damage. However, most of the time that's not the case. And it's because the people who are using those vehicles, who are operating those vehicles, one, don't have the intention of doing harm, and they've also taken the time to learn how to use those vehicles safely. And that is the perspective that I would want you to take regarding semi-auto handguns. Can they be misused? Yes. And if they're misused, can there be some very negative outcomes? Very much so. That's very true. There is the potential for a great amount of harm there, and that has to be recognized. But at the same time, like with any powerful machine, there is also going to be ways to minimize those risks and to handle it in ways that would be perfectly good and legitimate. And the intent behind the person, the intent of the person who's behind the gun, just like the intent of the person who's behind the wheel of the vehicle, is what makes the difference. What are they intending to do with it, and have they taken the time to actually understand how this thing works and how to responsibly and safely use this thing. So that's the perspective that I want us to have with regard to firearms as well. All right, now as to the 4 universal firearms rules, they are as follows. First, treat every firearm as if it is loaded. Second, we keep our trigger fingers off the trigger until we are at the firing line ready to shoot. Third, we do not point at anything that we're not willing to kill or destroy. And then fourth, we always make sure that we have a safe backstop. Now, remembering those 4 rules can be a little bit hard, especially if this is the first time that you've dealt with it or the first time that you've dealt with it in a long time. And so there is a mnemonic that I like to use that helps people remember it a little bit better, or at least gives them something else to hang the memory on, if nothing else. And the mnemonic is this. It's a single sentence. It's kind of a nonsensical sentence, but it's a single sentence, and the single sentence is this: that loaded fingers point at backstops. Loaded fingers point at backstops. Each part of that mnemonic, there are 4 parts of it, and each one of those parts correspond to one of the universal rules. So, loaded fingers point at backstops. What does the loaded tell us? We always treat every gun like it's loaded. So if somebody hands us a gun and they say, oh, it's safe, you don't believe them. That's not you being mean. That's called good firearm safety. Even if it's somebody that you trust, somebody that you know and love, and they tell you it's safe, don't trust them. Still treat it like it's loaded. Until you have actually checked and cleared it for yourself, you need to treat it like it's loaded. Well, what if the magazine's out of it? What if they hand you a gun that doesn't have a magazine in it at all? Well, surely that's safe, right? No, because even if there's nothing inside of the magazine well, you can actually still have a round in the chamber of pretty much every semi-auto. Notice in there that little bit of red, that's a dummy round. It's not a live round. I don't usually use live rounds in my videos for safety purposes, but I do have a dummy round in there just to show you that you can still have a cartridge in the gun even though the magazine well is empty. And if you make the mistake of treating the gun like it's unloaded when in fact it really is loaded, that can be really dangerous and really detrimental. So, loaded fingers point at backstops. We first treat every gun as if it was loaded. Even if the magazine's out, even if somebody that we trust told us that it's unloaded, we still treat it like it's loaded until we've confirmed for ourselves, until we've actually taken the time to open it up. And we'll talk about this in a future video of actually opening it up, checking the chamber, properly clearing the weapon. If we haven't cleared it ourselves, we should always treat it like it's loaded. Okay, that's not being mean to the person who told you that it's empty or anything like that. That is just proper firearms handling. And for young people, that's sometimes a little bit hard to get a hold of because, we usually want to trust the people that are around us. And a lot of times that's a good thing to do. When it comes to firearm safety, though, you should always default to the safe side of handling. And the safe side of handling is to assume that it is loaded. Okay, like I said, unless you've checked and cleared it for yourself, treat it like it's loaded. So loaded fingers point at backstop. Loaded. We always treat it like it's loaded. Fingers. What do we do with our fingers? Our trigger fingers, when we're holding the gun, our trigger finger should never be on the trigger itself or even touching the trigger guard. Our fingers go up on the frame of the gun. Unless we're actually at the firing line with the barrel pointed downrange, we do not put our trigger finger on the trigger or inside of the trigger guard. And frankly, that is sometimes a hard thing for a lot of people to get used to because they're used to seeing people in movies and media and whatnot always running around with their trigger finger actually on the trigger when they're holding their guns. And frankly, that is terrible handling. You do not need to have your trigger finger anywhere near the trigger until it's actually time to fire. Okay, in the context of recreationally shooting semi-autos, that means you're at a designated firing line and your barrel is pointed safely downrange. Okay, so loaded fingers point at. What are we supposed to point at? Well, only those things that we're willing to kill or destroy. Okay, unless you're hunting, and in our case, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about recreational shooting primarily. So unless you're hunting, What that basically means is that the barrel is always going to be pointed away from people. The two basic directions are either down at the ground, so that if the gun were to accidentally go off, and by the way, if a gun is properly made and maintained, it's not going to just suddenly go off, but we still default on the side of safety. Okay, that's what these rules are all about, is creating layers of protection to keep us well away from any situation in which something really bad might actually happen. We have layers in place to keep us really far away from doing something that would be really bad. So we make sure that what we're pointing at is safe to point at, and that's not going to be people, obviously, but that would also be valuable items like cars. You probably rode out to the place that you're going to be shooting at in a car, and you probably want to be able to ride in the car back. And that really works out a whole lot better if the car doesn't have bolt holes in its engine block or in its radiator or something like that. So we need to make sure that wherever we point the gun is a safe place to point the gun. If we're behind the firing line, if we're at the firing line, the safe place to put it is downrange shooting at the targets. If you're behind the firing line, what that usually means is either down at the ground or pointing it up in the air. And there's a couple of things that need to be remembered in either case. If you decide to carry your gun high, that's perfectly fine because you're not pointing out around you. But if you carry the gun high, you want to make sure that the barrel is always above your head. Okay, so if you carry high, make sure you carry high. If you decide to carry low, that's okay, but you need to make sure that you're not pointing at your own feet or the feet of people who are around you. So it needs to be a little bit out from you so that if something bad happens, you don't shoot yourself in the foot. But you also need to make sure that it's not so far out that you risk shooting somebody else in the foot. Does that make sense? Hopefully. So loaded fingers point at, and then finally backstops. What is a backstop? Well, a backstop is something that is in the back of the target. That's why it's called the backstop. And what it's supposed to do is stop bullets. So it's in the back of the target and it stops bullets. If you're shooting outdoors like I normally do, what that basically means is a big old pile of dirt. Dirt is actually pretty good at stopping bullets. Hillsides, mountains, they are terrific at stopping bullets. Absolutely fantastic. But even just a big pile of dirt by itself can also stop bullets pretty well. The general rule of thumb is that a backstop should be about twice as high as your highest target, and it should be about as thick as your highest target is tall. So take whatever your target height is from the ground to the top of the target, take that same distance back, and that's the minimum thickness that you should have in your backstop, and the height should basically be 2 targets tall, as a general rule of thumb. Now, when you're first starting, it's a good idea to go with other people who already kind of had a good idea of what would be safe and what isn't. But there again, if you're unsure, it's always better to err on the safe side. Look for a really thick hill, for a really thick pile of dirt. Entire mountain if you can. Something that you're going to be absolutely sure is going to stop those bullets. You need to be asking yourself, if I shoot this bullet right now at the target and I go through the target, what's it going to hit? And is it what it's going to hit safe to shoot at? And is it going to stop it from going any further? And what happens if I miss the target? Because when you start shooting, or if you haven't been shooting in a while, you're probably going to miss the target a few times. What happens if I miss? If I go to the left or to the bottom or to the right or to the top? Exactly where is my safety zone? I need to be thinking about those things. Is my target area actually safe to shoot at? Do I have something behind the target that is actually going to stop it? Do I have something that is in the back of the target that is actually going to be adequate to stop the bullets that are going in that direction? Okay. So that is the 4 universal rules of firearm safety. Like I said, the first one is we always treat a gun like it's loaded. Unless you've checked and cleared it for yourself, even if somebody you know and trust hands it to you and says that it's empty, you either need to check and clear it for yourself or you treat it like it's loaded. If in doubt, you treat it like it's loaded. Second, we keep our trigger finger off of the trigger until it's actually time to fire. If we're not on the firing line with the barrel pointed down range, it's not time to fire, and so that trigger finger needs to be up on the frame of the gun, not on the trigger, not on the trigger guard. It needs to be up on the frame of the gun. Okay. Third rule is that we always need to be careful of where we're pointing the gun. If we're at the firing line, it needs to be pointed at the target. If we're not at the firing line, it needs to be pointed down or it needs to be pointed up. If it's pointed down, make sure that you're not pointing it at your own feet or other people's feet. If you're pointing it up, make sure that it is higher than your head. Okay? And then last but not least, make sure that you have a safe backstop. It is in the back of the target and it's going to stop everything that you could possibly throw at it. It needs to be nice and big and wide, and there's no chance that a bullet is going to get through that thing. That's it. Loaded fingers point at backstops. Treat guns like they're loaded. Even if somebody you trust says otherwise, treat it like it's loaded. Make sure that your trigger finger stays off that trigger until you're actually at the firing line with the barrel pointed down range. Make sure that wherever you're pointing that thing is safe to point it at. Never point it at anything that you're not willing to kill or destroy. Generally, that means pointing it down, but not at your feet or other people's feet, or pointing it up, but above your own head. And then loaded fingers point at backstops, meaning that you need to have something behind the target that is going to stop everything that you would throw at it, and it needs to be wide, tall, and thick. All right, that's it. I would suggest that you guys take some time to talk about it with each other. Make sure that you rehearse things with each other. If you need that mnemonic, loaded fingers point at backstops, go ahead and practice it a bunch of times and make sure that you can cite each rule separately. And also practice. You don't necessarily have to have a gun to practice with. Finger gun works just fine. Practice going around with your trigger finger elevated instead of out. Have the habit of keeping it up and straight, and make sure that you go around with it down or with it up. Perfectly fine thing to go around practicing, and ask other people to help you practice. One of the big things is talking, because a lot of people, like myself included, like to talk with our hands, and sometimes, if we're pretending that we have our gun in our hands, sometimes there are actually people who will talk with their hands while still carrying a gun, and that's really dangerous. So you need to get in the habit. If you're going to pretend that this is your gun, you need to get in the habit of holding this in a safe place and keeping it steady while everything else is going on. And having people role play that with you and talk to you and try to get you to use your hands, and consciously telling yourself not to do that can be a really helpful thing. Okay? And then also, as you go around different places and drive different places and look at different things, ask yourself, would that be a good backstop? Am I sure that would actually properly stop bullets? Would that be wide enough and tall enough and thick enough to actually do the job? And then, of course, like I already mentioned, making sure that we're pointing in a safe direction, all those kinds of things. You can make a game of it as long as you're actually defaulting in the right direction, of course. But talk about it with each other. Talk about it kind of within yourself. Do I really know this? Do I really understand this? Can I remember all 4 rules? Like I said, use the mnemonic if you have to. Loaded fingers point at backstop. We always treat guns like they're loaded. We keep our fingers off the trigger and outside of the trigger guard until we're at the firing line with the barrel pointed down range. We never point at anything that we aren't willing to kill or destroy, meaning that we either point it down at the ground, but not at people's feet or my feet, or straight up, but always above head level. And we always make sure that our target has a suitable backstop, something that is wide enough, tall enough, and thick enough to stop any bullets that we might send its way. That's it. Practice it. Make sure that you can remember it. All those good things. Thank you very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know him and to submit to him. He is the only genuine Savior of mankind and the only true Lord of Lords. Amen.